What's going on, everybody, and welcome to the Week 7 NFL Fantasy Football Preview. Thanks for tuning in again, and this is Josh, and I am back again with Stokes. What's up, Stokes?
Cheer.
Mixed it up a little longer version of it. Got to keep him guessing.
That's right. Gotta throw a little curveball here and there. Kershaw style.
And then back again for the fun of it is Hadley. What's going on, Hadley?
I just want to shout out my biggest fan, Edub. I'm sure he's listening and hanging on our every word right now.
Intently.
So
Edub. Edub is a big fan of Hadley.
Bated breath.
So it's good. It's good. It's good that we have guys coming together and forming friendships and bonds that'll last forever. All right, guys, let's stop with that, the Edub nonsense. And Stokes, you did mention Kershaw. We're not going to bring up baseball tonight because we don't want JT to get all upset because his Dodgers are down 3-2 and it's not looking good. We got some Canadians that are probably upset about the Blue Jays, but does the world stop when the Indians and the Cubs play in the World Series, Stokes?
Oh man, I don't even know. That's gonna be crazy because when you consider what Cleveland was, and then now with LeBron, or after LeBron won, and now them, it's just pretty ridiculous.
I mean, as Bills fans, though, you look at it like if Cleveland can get the NBA title and the Cubs could get the World Series, why not us?
It's our time.
It's
I mean, we're working with 17, 16, 17 years without playoffs, right?
Meanwhile, like in Buffalo fans, the standard is, can we just like sneak into the playoffs as like one of those 9-7 wild card teams? Like we'll lose first round. We don't even care. Like
Yeah, we don't want to get too crazy. Just let us in the dance.
well, just make us the Houston Texans of last year. We'll lose 30-0 in the first round. Just prove to us there's a game beyond Week 17. All right, guys. That sounds like a fantasy, and let's start talking about some other fantasy football.
Yeah.
As we are going to be kicking off with a game overseas in London as the Los Angeles Rams and the New York Giants do battle at 9:30 in the morning Sunday morning. So it's one of those all day long football marathons that ends with Walking Dead season premiere. I can't wait. For the Rams, Trumaine Johnson is out again. That's huge for their secondary. He's their best player on the back end. He misses another game. And the Giants are getting healthier. Beckham was questionable throughout the week. They actually listed him as probable, which doesn't even exist anymore. I think they're just trolling the NFL there, which, if you're the Giants, this may not be the right week to troll the NFL with the whole Josh Brown situation. I'm just saying. But they're getting healthier. Rashad Jennings is also probable, which means he's going to play. Hadley, Rams, Giants, what sticks out to you?
it's obviously not available on the main slates there on FanDuel and DraftKings. But if you played Thursday night lineups, then you got those guys available. Last week was pretty tilting, having a lot of Tavon Austin, and then you see Kenny Britt just absolutely go off, and Tavon Austin does nothing with Case Keenum having the game of his life, so that was fantastic. Obviously, Beckham in a good spot to go off again. I think Troy Hill is the name of the cornerback that's probably going to be facing him most of the time, and I saw like a screenshot of the PFF wide receiver versus cornerback, and that's the biggest advantage for a wide receiver against a cornerback based on their stats. So it's probably going to kill them, which I need because I got a combined 6.96 points from Zach Miller and Brian Hoyer Thursday to start my season-long week. So that's how we're going.
Not good, going slow, going like Todd Gurley, who's averaging 2.9 yards per carry. Stokes, what do you think about this game?
Avoiding the Giants' backfield situation yet again. I'd be avoiding Eli. Eli's a fringe starter even in season long at this point. You can't really trust that he's going to be consistent on a game-to-game basis. But if you have Gurley in season long, you're obviously going to start him. And I would imagine that even in the Thursday Sunday morning matchups, Gurley's in most of those lineups because the running backs for the Giants are terrible, and you had no idea what to think of the Packers. So I'd imagine there's a lot of Jordan Howard and Todd Gurley. But I think this Sunday morning is probably a week where they go back to Tavon Austin as far as trying to get him back involved. unless Britt just wants to continue to beast, then I guess that'll be that. But I don't trust Case Keenum at all.
Britt's been on a really nice roll. Britt in England, that would be fitting. He's been on a really nice roll. I read that he's on pace, if he continues his pace, to hit about 1,300 passing yards. Nobody expects that, but he has taken over as the primary receiver in this offense, and Case Keenum has opened it up a little bit. When a running game struggles like the Rams are, 2.9 yards per carry, you got to find other ways to move the ball, and right now it's going through Kenny Britt. Obviously, you like Odell Beckham in this matchup with Tremaine Johnson out, and with Beckham finally having his breakout game last week. He was questionable this week. He did practice today. He's listed as probable, so it means he's going to play. Another guy on the Giants that we should probably mention, Shepard. Now, he started off super strong, and then he kind of faded away the last couple of weeks, but this might be a get-right matchup for him. The Rams really struggle against the slot receiver, and it's been Shepard lining up in the slot for the Giants primarily this season, even with Victor Cruz back. So do either of you like Shepard as maybe I don't know if it'd even be a contrarian play, but just kind of a bold, cheap play on DraftKings? Start with you, Hadley.
Yeah, I haven't really considered it because they're just they're not showing much between the other two receivers lately. So until we have some evidence that they're still going to be involved, I'm not going to go back there.
What do you think about Shepard, Stokes?
If I was going to go for a cheaper option than the elite, I would go with Austin over Shepard, because I think that Austin is going to have a bigger, or he should have a bigger part of the offense than Shepard would and should.
So it's interesting. Shepard's 5,100 on DraftKings and Kenny Britt's 4,300. So it seems like if you're going to go a cheaper option, like Stokes said, you could go Tavon Austin, but you could also just go Kenny Britt and still save about $800 there. Shepard to me is a guy that if you're in season long, maybe the owner's starting to get frustrated with him. You could get a buy low candidate there. Obviously, Beckham's going to be in your lineup. Guys, are you making... let's talk about Rashad Jennings real quick here. You guys mentioned you probably don't want to start him in daily, although he is pretty cheap for a guy that's going to get the majority of the carries. Now, he's going to submit the receiving catches to Bobby Rainey, who seems to have taken over that Shane Riverine role. But the Rams have been very bad against the run. For a running back that I believe is around 4,000, 4,000, is Rashad Jennings worth a flyer or just not enough upside? Hadley?
Yeah, I mean, I don't see it. Like, he's done nothing this year, right? Like, at a certain point, you need someone to prove something before you can really justify putting them in your lineup.
All right, well, it looks like we're all in agreement. Obviously, we're excited about Beckham this week. Stokes says Manning is a fringe starter, but overall, if you have Gurley in season long, you're going to have to play him. And Kenny Britt's a guy to obviously keep your eye on, and Stokes seems to be pretty high on Tavon Austin's chances of bouncing out this week. Either one of these defenses jump out to either of you before we move on to the next game?
No.
Yeah, I mean, no.
All right. Let's go to the 1:00 slate, and let's do the Battle of Ohio as the Cleveland Browns travel to Cincinnati to take on the Bengals. Tyler Eifert is questionable, but he practiced all week and looks like he's on track to play this game. For Cleveland, just a mash unit. Now, Terrell Pryor missed practice all week this week. He is listed as questionable. If you listen to what Stephania Bell says on ESPN, even if he plays, it seems like he's going to be more of a decoy role. So I would probably look for other options there in season long and just avoid altogether in daily. And then for Cleveland's defense, Joe Hayden is out, which could mean good things for A.J. Green. So, Stokes, what stands out to you about this matchup?
Cleveland just can't have anything, can they? I mean, Corey Coleman started out hot. He had a great couple games, and he broke his hand. Terrell Pryor starting to break out. Now he's injured. It's just awful for Cleveland. I feel bad for the the city. Well, not the Browns fans. That's all I feel bad. But
Josh Gordon comes back, but nope, he's going back to rehab.
Yeah, RG3 it's just awful. But I don't like any part of this. I mean, I like the Bengals defense, as I would imagine a lot of people are going to like, because they have essentially no wide receivers. All they have is the run game, and Cody Kessler's passing the ball, and that's awful. So, I mean, I like the Bengals defense. And obviously A.J. Green, because A.J. Green is ridiculously good, and when in doubt, you'd expect Dalton to at least give him 10 targets just on principle.
If you're a Jordan Reed owner or a Greg Olson owner who's on a bye this week, or maybe even a Jason Witten owner if that's your thing, maybe Gary Barnidge is a guy you look at. I'm sure he's been dropped in quite a few leagues. I'm thinking more season long, or maybe a cheap daily play. Not sure what his price is, but at some point, if Cleveland's going to struggle to do anything on offense, they're going to have to move the ball somehow, some way, and Gary Barnidge could just be the guy by default in the passing game. So maybe he gets more involved this week. Hadley, what stands out to you about this matchup?
Yeah, I think I might play Barnidge a little bit. He's pretty cheap across the industry, and I think that if you go by the DraftKings numbers that they have there, if you look, Cincy is 26th against the tight end, so that's a good matchup for Barnidge. The one thing I definitely want to get to, I like Andy Dalton this week, because people are just destroying Cleveland through the air. If you look at quarterbacks against the Browns and project it out through a full season, they're on pace for 4,725 yards and 42 touchdowns, which those type of numbers have only been done by 4 people: Brady, Breeze, Peyton Manning, and Dan Marino. So, I mean,
It's pretty good.
They're on pace to give up that type of season to quarterbacks. And everyone that has faced the Browns this week, this season, as far as quarterbacks, have outperformed their fantasy numbers compared to when they face other opponents. So, very good QB matchup is the Browns.
And then we mentioned Joe Hayden being out, so obviously you're endorsing some form of an Andy Dalton, AJ Green stack. But beyond that, do you like Tyler Boyd in this matchup? Do you like Brandon LaFell? Are you looking at Tyler Eifert even coming back and maybe playing a limited role? Who else stands out to you besides the main guys?
Yeah, so it's going to depend on the news that comes out for Tyler Eifert, because the Browns have been very bad against tight end as well. They're actually 32nd on the DraftKings scoring there. So you got to like him. He led all tight ends in touchdowns last year, right? Brandon LaFell and Tyler Boyd, there's enough value out there that I don't think that you have to go there. But yeah, it's going to depend on the news on Eifert. If we get good news, then I'll probably play him in a couple lineups.
I like Dalton a lot this week. AJ Green's going to be in almost every lineup I have. I'm probably not going to touch anybody else from the receiving end of things in Cincinnati, and that includes Tyler Eifert. I just want to take a wait-and-see approach, see how he's involved. I know it's a juicy matchup, and he's back, and you're excited, and if you're in season long, I get it. You want to get him in your lineup, but from a daily perspective, there's too many other options I like out there where I wouldn't want to risk it on Tyler Eifert. I do want to talk about the running backs, and I think both of these teams kind of mirror each other, where they have a guy who is a good pass catcher, and they have a guy who is a good between the tackles downhill runner. And so I think a lot of it, what it comes down to is people are concerned, well, Duke Johnson and Crowell have been splitting snaps, and then Gio Bernard has actually out-touched Jeremy Hill the last 2 weeks. But I think what you can look at with these two backfields, it's a lot about game flow. The last 2 weeks, Cincinnati has played Dallas and New England. They lost both those games handily, and so it was kind of easy to predict, and we talked about on this show, that Gio Bernard would probably be more involved in the offense than Jeremy Hill. So with that in mind, I think this could be a Jeremy Hill game where I expect Cincinnati to be ahead comfortably and Jeremy Hill to pound the rock. And then you look at the other team on the game, I think this could be a Duke Johnson game, since I think Cleveland's going to be down. They don't have a lot of weapons in the passing game anyway. We already talked about the prior injury, so I could see Duke Johnson being more involved, and I think this could be a Duke Johnson game over Crowell. So the two backs I like in this game for the respective teams are Duke Johnson and Jeremy Hill, although I do like Gio Bernard in this game anyway. He's involved enough, and Cleveland's defense is bad enough that I think both Gio Bernard and Jeremy Hill could produce. So, Stokes, any final thoughts on this matchup?
No. I mean, you've been on the Gio wagon for like all of the weeks we've done the show. You're a lover of Gio, but overall, no, not really. It's just what I said previously. I mean, I like the Bengals defense and AJ Green. I imagine I would put Dalton in a lineup just because when the defense is getting shredded like that, it's worth putting in your lineup just for the chance.
Hadley, how about you? Any final thoughts on this game? Dalton right now looks like he's costing out about 6,000 on DraftKings, so I expect ownership to be pretty high on him. What are your final thoughts on this game?
Yeah, so I don't worry too much about quarterback ownership because there's so many quarterback plays out there that you never really see anyone like super crazily owned. Dalton's definitely a better play on DraftKings with the discount that you get there versus he's actually a little, I would say, almost overpriced on FanDuel if you look at where he's sitting in relation to the top guys. I would definitely not play either Browns running back this week. I mean, Duke Johnson, I think he has one rushing touchdown his whole career, which was last week. So you need like at least somewhat of a chance to score touchdowns, and he doesn't really bring it. I could see a case for both Cincinnati backs. I'm a little bit worried about Jeremy Hill because I think Bernard got 3 touches like in a goal-to-go situation when the game was still close. I don't think, based on like how I was watching that game like fairly closely, I don't think that it would have made a difference if it's Jeremy Hill in there. But obviously, Bernard didn't get the touchdown there, and Pick posted the complaint there on Facebook about how it wasn't Hill in that situation. So I don't know what that was about. I don't know if Hill just wasn't quite ready enough. He was coming back from a chest injury, I believe. This week he's not on the injury report, but definitely a little scared about the workload for him.
They don't shy away from using Bernard in the red zone, which is one reason why I've always kind of liked him, especially in PPR leagues. Is it seems like if it's his drive or his turn to be in the game, they don't take him out for short yardage situations, even though you would think that Jeremy Hill would be the guy in that situation. Let's go to the Washington Redskins traveling to Detroit to take on the Lions. Unfortunately for the Redskins, Jordan Reed is out again with concussion. It seemed like he had made some progress throughout the week, even got back to practicing on a limited basis as far as individual work, but still in concussion protocol, so keep an eye on that. You could be without him for another week or two. And then Deshaun Jackson didn't practice all week and obviously didn't practice on Friday, so he's questionable, but that feels more like a doubtful, although Deshaun Jackson obviously is the caliber of player where if he shows up feeling fine on Sunday, they'll throw him out there. And then from the Detroit standpoint, same guys that were out last week are out this week. Ebron's out, Riddick's out, and then defensively they're still kind of a mash unit with DeAndre Levy and Ezekiel Ansah out. Hadley, what stands out to you about this matchup?
I'm not really a guy that usually plays the older people, #age bias, but that Detroit tight end matchup, they've allowed 7 touchdowns, which leads the league to tight ends. And Vernon Davis, although he only caught 2 passes last week, I mean, he did take them for 50 yards and a touchdown, and he played 72 of 74 snaps against an Eagles defense, which is actually, a pretty good unit versus Detroit, which is, very generous to the tight end. So I like Vernon Davis and Kirk Cousins in the matchup against Detroit. Detroit's just been so bad through the air. 32nd against quarterbacks on DraftKings, so that's on the Washington side. I like that. I think there's merit to going back to Stokes' boy Golden Tate. I don't really think it's point chasing because, I mean, he was very involved, and I think there's some validity to the idea that with Theo Riddick out, there's some overlap there in that role, the Theo Riddick role and the Golden Tate role. So it just gives Golden Tate a little bump when he's out, I think.
Yeah, a lot of these teams that can't run the ball effectively use the short pass as their pseudo running game, and that's where Theo Riddick was getting so involved because the Lions have not been able to run the ball well at all. Theo Riddick's points are actually coming as a receiver, and like Hadley mentioned, Golden Tate, his main role in the offense to date has been those short passes. So with Riddick out, he's taking up those. Stokes, what do you like about this matchup?
My guy. Golden Domer, Golden Tate. Obviously, I like him again. He's still not where I would expect this price to be because it's just one big game. But I think that he was used more effectively last year, and I think they're getting back to that. And I could see him having similar production to that. I would probably throw in Vernon Davis in a couple lineups because of the fact that the Lions are so terrible against the tight end, and with the fact that he's on the field for so many snaps, he's bound to just get better and more comfortable with Kirk Cousins because Jordan Reed's not out there, and he's still a physical freak, I believe. If I was going to take a stab at one of the running backs in this game, I'd probably go with Zenner. He didn't look too bad running the ball. And I think that Washington, according to DraftKings, they are not so good against the run.
So you guys both mentioned Kirk Cousins and also mentioned Vernon Davis, but if Kirk Cousins is going to have a good day, it can't just come by throwing to a 34-year-old tight end. It means that one of the receivers is probably going to have a decent day too. If you assume Deshaun Jackson is out, which we don't know at this point in time, do you like Pierre Garçon or do you like Crowder in this matchup? Hadley?
A lot of DFS guys have brought up Pierre Garçon, so I'll say that. I can't bring myself to play him. He's not like a super good athlete, I would say, like for a wide receiver. So I don't like playing guys like that. He's like a younger like Anquan Bolden or something, Like I'm not gonna play Anquan Bolden either. Crowder has the best matchup. He's gonna be in the slot, I think, regardless of if Djax plays or not, and Quandre Diggs, I think is how you say that guy's name, and he's been abysmal, and he's Detroit's slot corner, so definitely some merit to playing Crowder. Also, kind of like Matt Jones. He doesn't get the biggest workload because they mix in Chris Thompson for passing downs, and they got this other guy, Kelly, that comes in a little bit. But, he's shown good power and good breakaway speed as well. Last year he was pretty poor, but I think Washington's run blocking has improved a lot. And we talked about last week when Detroit was playing the Rams that it might be a get right game for Gurley because Detroit gives up a lot of yards, but they hadn't been giving up touchdowns to the running back. Of course, they gave up a rushing touchdown, but it was to Case Keenum of all people. So you could see Matt Jones have a pretty good day, and he's priced cheaply on the two major sites.
I like the Matt Jones idea a lot. I think it's just a volume situation, and with them missing a couple of their biggest pass catchers, I wouldn't be surprised if Jay Gruden tries to ground out some running game, even though the secondary against Detroit looks like something you could pick on. I will say one thing that's in favor of Golden Tate this week is there's some reports out of Washington that they expect Josh Norman to go against his normal habit and to follow Marvin Jones wherever he goes in this game. So that might be a reason to also like Golden Tate. Stokes, any final thoughts on this matchup?
No, sir. No final thoughts from me.
Hadley, you good on this one?
Just another thing in Matt Jones's favor. There's a really clear, and we'll get to him, obviously, Rodgers, a really clear guy in the cheap price range, right, that a lot of people are going to be on. It's going to give you a chance to really break away in terms of ownership percentage if you choose, let's say, Matt Jones instead of Jacquizz Rodgers, for example.
Yeah, Rodgers is going to be a guy that everybody's going to be on. And another guy that everybody's going to be on is coming up in our next matchup as the Buffalo Bills travel to Miami to take on the Miami Dolphins. The big news in this game is LaShawn McCoy injured his hamstring in practice on Wednesday, missed practice on Thursday, did come back on a very limited basis on Friday. He's questionable, but kind of reading the tea leaves and the guys that cover the team, it sounds like they're going to take it easy with him, and I don't expect him to play in this game. Robert Woods is also doubtful for this game. Charles Clay lives questionable, but the interesting thing about Charles Clay is what we've been telling you all season is Charles Clay has the knee injury, so he's pretty much going to be questionable every week unless it gets worse. Well, last week he actually left the game and didn't come back, so I wouldn't just assume Charles Clay is fine this week. I expect him to play, but don't just assume that this is a typical Charles Clay's questionable, but he's going to be in there. Because if he does play, it's a nice matchup for him against his old team. And speaking of tight ends, the Dolphins are going to be without both of their top two tight ends. Jordan Cameron and Deion Sims are out. Arian Foster looks like he's trending towards playing. as he was a full participant in practice on Friday. And one note for Miami, and he's such a good player, it's worth bringing up. Rashad Jones, their stud safety, one of the best safeties in the league that nobody talks about because he's forced to play in Miami. He might be out for the year, and that's just going to be a tremendous blow. And you would think with a safety it would hurt their passing game, but he's actually their best run stopper. So this could be good news for the Bills. But guys, to me, the lead in this game comes down to the McCoy injury. Hadley talked about Jacquez Rodgers, but Mike Gillislee, if McCoy is out, is going to be right there with Rodgers as far as intriguing matchups because Miami gives up the second most rushing yards to San Francisco. And the reason why San Francisco leapfrogged Miami is because they played Buffalo last week, and Buffalo's been running on everybody. So now Buffalo travels to Miami to take on an equally bad run defense. It's not going to be LaShawn McCoy, but you can get Mike Gillislee at a discounted price. This is assuming McCoy doesn't play. So that's the backdrop on this game. Stokes, I'll throw it to you. What stands out to you about this game?
Yeah, if Shady doesn't play, I mean, with Gillislee being 3,000 on DraftKings, he's going to be in a ridiculous amount of lineups, because of the simple fact that he's going to be cheap and he's going to be in a run-based offense. And I can also see Jay Ajayi after last week, him holding on to that job and getting 20 touches. I understand that Foster is he's getting healthy, but I think that they'd much rather, from a long-term view, give the ball to Ajayi and let him build off that. But if the Dolphins do get behind, I do think that the Bills have the pass rush. If Lorenzo Alexander's still good, and with Shaq Lawson coming back, and I think that Tannehill he just doesn't understand. He doesn't have the pocket awareness to consistently avoid getting sacked. So I think that could be something as well in this game.
The Bills' defense are a tremendous play this week. I was having a conversation with somebody earlier this week, and it's really hard to predict defenses, in my opinion, in fantasy. It feels almost like it's such a guessing game, and all of this really is a guessing game. But defenses in particular, because a lot of our thoughts are like, oh, well, they're not going to score a lot of points, but all of a sudden you get a busted coverage or whatever, and a team that you thought was going to score 10 scores 20, and it just screws it all up. But what I do, I look for teams that I think either compile a lot of sacks or going against quarterbacks that give up a lot of sacks. And then when you get a marriage of the two, that's when I pounce. And what you have here in Buffalo is a team that's top 5 in the NFL in sacks on defense, and you have a quarterback in Ryan Tannehill who is top 5, top 6 in as far as getting sacked. So it's a beautiful thing, and the Bills have owned Tannehill. So I think the Bills are a great play. I don't expect them to be available in your daily leagues or in your season-long leagues because they've had a couple of juicy matchups in a row, so they've probably been scooped up. But from a daily standpoint, they're going to be expensive, but if you're going to pay up for a defense, I could see them being an option that might be worth doing it for. Hadley, what stands out to you about this matchup?
Yeah, definitely like the Bills. Typically, I don't like playing a defense on the road, but just Miami's offense, like I agree with Stokes that Tannehill's like not the greatest in terms of pocket awareness and stuff like that, but just their offensive line in general too is like really bad. So, a lot of sacks to be had there. When you're looking at a defense, you want to think less about are they going to allow points, or you want to think about do they have the opportunity to score points. So that comes in sacks, that comes in turnovers, and if you get sacks and that can lead to a fumble, that can lead to a scoop and score. If the quarterback is prone to throw interceptions, that could be a pick six. That's the type of thing that gives you, particularly in tournaments, for example, right? Like tournament winning upside. If your defense gets in for a touchdown or two, it can really change things. I'm worried. I have Jarvis Landry in my season long, and I'm kind of like Roby Coleman there. He's been really locking it down in the slot, so that matchup has me a little bit concerned when I would normally just fire up Landry. So, you guys are the Bills fans there. I don't know if you want to talk me back into Landry or what, but has me concerned for sure.
If you're talking season long, I think you throw him out there because I think Landry's almost gotten to the point where he's matchup proof, especially if you're in a PPR league, because Tannehill just looks to him so much. And Roby Coleman has been playing out of his mind in the slot. This, to me, is one of the more intriguing matchups because you have one of the highest-rated slot receivers going against one of the highest-rated slot corners, who's ironically was named Nickel. So maybe he was born to be a slot slot corner. But
Yeah.
Stokes, to me, I mean, I don't have the numbers in front of me. It doesn't seem like in previous Bills matchups with Roby Coleman on the team that Landry's been shut down. It seems to me like Landry always tends to get his against the Bills. Maybe not in the form of touchdowns because Tannehill's been so bad against the Bills, but it seems like he's always involved, always gets his catches, and probably won't disappoint you, especially in PPR.
Yeah, I wouldn't let something like I wouldn't let the fact that Roby's playing. I wouldn't let that deter me from using Landry. I think that he's good enough to be able to get what he's going to get regardless of the situation. So I would still play Landry regardless. I don't think that, as Josh said, I believe he's matchup proof and that Tannehill is going to look to him as long as the game is within reach, and even if it's not, he's going to target him, and I can see him getting 10 plus targets and 7 catches. What he does with those 7 catches is up to whoever.
I'm intrigued by Devontae Parker and Kenny Stills in this game. Maybe more so Parker, just because the Bills, for as good as they've been on defense, they have been a little susceptible to giving up the big play. Had a busted coverage last week where Torrey Smith got behind the defense, and that seems to be Devontae Parker's role right now on the offense. And maybe he gets a big play. I wouldn't rush to get him in my lineup, but just a guy to keep your eye on. We told you last week, and not to toot our own horn, but we told you that if you're a Shady McCoy owner, that it was time to get Mike Gillislee on your roster, that he had clearly separated from Reggie Bush and Jonathan Williams as far as who McCoy's running mate was, and if McCoy got hurt, it would be the Gillislee show. So hopefully if you own McCoy in your league and you listen to this show, you went out and picked up Mike Gillislee, because that could win you a matchup this week, because I don't expect Gillislee to go off for 150 and 3 touchdowns or anything like that, but I think he's going to get the volume of the carries in the offense. What I do expect him to do is not get the Shady McCoy all-around touches. Shady he plays until he's tired, and then somebody else, then Gillislee comes in, and then Shady comes back in. What I expect Gillislee to do is play primarily in running downs, and for Reggie Bush to handle the third down packages and the pure passing down. So I do think you're not going to see Gillislee get as many touches as McCoy does, but I expect him to have a big day and probably find the end zone, maybe 80 yards, maybe 10, 20 more yards in the air and a touchdown. Robert Woods being out is a big deal. I expect Marquise Goodwin to take over that number 1 wide receiver role, which is pretty scary. Maybe Justin Hunter, who's been coming on, will take on a bigger role, but to me, it's going to be the running game and Charles Clay. If Charles Clay plays, I love him, especially in PPR. I think they're going to get him involved. Jay Ajayi, big week last week. I think he's going to be the guy. The Bills' run defense hasn't been super leaky. They've shut down some good running backs, but at this point, a healthy body getting a volume of carries, it's at this point, with the way fantasy's going, you can't sneeze at that. So that's my final thoughts on this game, and I do love the Bills' defense, as mentioned before. I probably don't love the Dolphins' defense, but I think you could do worse than the Dolphins' defense. But the scary thing about Miami is this. I know they beat Pittsburgh last week, but if you watch that game, once Roethlisberger got hurt, it just kind of seemed like Pittsburgh, and I know Roethlisberger came back in, but he wasn't right. It just seemed like Pittsburgh just mentally checked out of that game at that point. They started missing tackles, and they just looked out of sync. And Miami's a scary team. They've had 3 home games in a row. They got a bye week next week. They have some guys on their roster that are pretty notorious for not always giving the best effort. I could just see a situation where Miami sees that bye week next week and they're just like, let's just get through this game and let's party down here in South Florida. So that's a team that it's never too far away from quitting. So I don't know if I'd be too anxious to try to guess on guys on their side. I think you play Landry, you play Ajayi, and then you play Gillislee or McCoy if McCoy plays. If McCoy plays, that's pretty scary, though, Stokes, because if you're a McCoy owner, he could play and leave after the first drive, or he could be a 50-50 split with Gillislee. But if McCoy plays, there's no way you keep him out of your lineup.
And season long for sure. I wouldn't risk any tournaments with him, especially with it being a hamstring, because he could have 20 carries, he could have 1 carry and just be done. So I wouldn't risk anything as far as the tournament is concerned. So that would be. I would hate if I was a DFS owner. If I was going to use Gillislee, I would hate to see Shady be active because you just don't know. Yeah, that would be my thought
Oh,
process.
I think Gillisley's a great play, but if Shady's active, I think you just avoid the Bills' backfield altogether. Hadley, I'm going to give you one last question, DFS play-wise. Tyrod Taylor's a guy that even though he's not going to come into this game with his weapons there, Watkins out, Woods out, Clay hurt, Shady McCoy out, he's a guy that can still find his way to putting up points. 5,500 on DraftKings. What do you think about Tyrod this week?
Yeah, I do like Tyrod, but with so many people injured for the Bills, I don't think it's necessary to go there, especially you compare him at 5,500 and what was Dalton again?
6,000, so it's same.
I mean, $500 savings is you get so much more with Andy Dalton there. So
if we were going to go for a wide receiver in the game, I would like Justin Hunter. I think that he's a decent red zone target, and I could see him getting some chances.
And I think he's the most talented guy they have, and at some point, talent's going to have to win out. And I even think he might even be more talent-wise than Robert Woods. So hopefully maybe this is a change of scenery situation for him. Guys, let's talk about the Indianapolis Colts traveling to Tennessee to take on the Titans. And this injury report almost looks unfair, as the Colts, their injury report looks like a mile long, and the Titans have 2 guys injured on their entire roster, neither of which are relevant for fantasy. But for the Colts, Dwayne Allen's out, Dante Moncrief is still out, Philip Dorsett is out, so it's a mash unit. And the Titans, they don't have anybody that really concerns you from a fantasy standpoint. So, Hadley, this game's in Tennessee. What stands out to you about this game?
So it's interesting, right? Because, I mean, DeMarco Murray has been good all season, but he kind of got shut down there a little bit last week and saved you a little bit by getting a touchdown. But efficiency-wise, he wasn't doing too well for you there. Let me double-check his stats. He was 21 carries for 65 yards, so, 3.1 yards per carry. But, on the other hand, Colts are dreadful against the running back, and particularly they give a lot of receiving yards to running backs. So they've allowed 40-plus receiving yards to 5 different running backs this season. So both Detroit running backs that one game, if you remember, it was Theo Riddick and Abdullah getting it done in the air. It was also Melvin Gordon and then T.J. Yeldon and Jordan Howard. So no other team has allowed 40-plus yards to a running back more than 3 times. And again, 5 different running backs for the Colts have done that. The only thing, though, is if we look at the ownership reports, 50% owned on Fantasy Aces. Now, I think that's a little inflated because it's a smaller site, so you get really like diehard DFS players that are playing there, right? Like the casual person is going to see DeMarco kind of was meh last week. I don't think they'll be all over him, so I don't expect it to be that extreme on like DraftKings and FanDuel, but don't think that you're sneaking up on anyone with DeMarco Murray this week.
And Stokes, is this where we get our weekly reminder that Derrick Henry is a Titan?
No, I am on DeMarco Murray this week. I think that the Colts are just terrible against the running back, and I like DeMarco Murray this week. And it is what it is. I love Derrick Henry. He's still awesome, but they just not letting him meet. So it is what it is. I'll ride with DeMarco this week.
One strategy is if you were to go with a guy like a Mike Gillislee or a Jacquez Rodgers where you're saving a lot of money at one running back spot, is the other strategy is then you could pay up for a stud at the other running back spot. Well, if you look at the stud, you have Le'Veon Bell, who's 8,000 on DraftKings, but I think with the situation at quarterback there, you'd probably shy away from that. Next highest is LaShawn McCoy. No way, no how. I don't care if he plays or not. No chance. David Johnson against Seattle, 7,400. David Johnson's going to be involved enough, but still against Seattle, and Arizona's offenses look pretty shaky outside of a game against a Jets team that looked like they didn't care about the game. Then you get to DeMarco Murray at 7,200. So he might be the guy that guys target as far as pairing with one of those bargain running backs. So it's a tough spot because there were so many people that were let down by DeMarco Murray last year that I think in our mind there's still a trust issue there. And it's like, if I'm going to pay up for him to be a stud in my lineup, you're paying 7,200. That means you need 21, 22 points out of him this week, which means he has to get to the end zone. He has to get 100 yards. He has to be involved in the passing game, all of which is very likely against a really terrible Colts defense. But it's still DeMarco Murray, and there's the letdown factor. Do you want to put all your eggs, as they say, in DeMarco Murray's basket? From the Colts standpoint, I like Andrew Luck this week. I like T.Y. Hilton this week. I love Jack Doyle this week, but I wouldn't touch any other Colts weapons. And for the Titans, I think Mariota's an interesting streamer because the Colts defense is so bad, but I would temper my expectations because I could see this just being a situation where they decide early and often they can run it down their throat, and Mike Mularkey, if he sees an advantage there, he's not going to care about passing. If he can see his team run it down somebody's throat, he's not going to care about getting one passing yard. So I could see Stokes' boy Derrick Henry even getting involved in this game. But I think Mariota is going to be a pretty popular play. Stokes, any final thoughts on this game?
Let me see. I can't see. I can support Andrew Luck because he's going to pass a lot, and he still has weapons despite not having Dante Moncrief. And I'm with you on Jack Doyle. With Dwayne Allen out, I think that he's their best and only option at tight end. And if there's one thing we've learned about Luck, he likes to utilize the tight end. And Doyle, I think at his price point, you could really get some good value out of it.
I think season long you can feel good if you have Frank Gore. I think he'll get you some solid RB2 numbers. I know Hadley hates Frank Gore in fantasy, but not somebody you want to necessarily throw out there in daily, but some guy that won't kill you in season long. And I do have one sleeper pick for this game, but Hadley, I'll see if you have any final thoughts.
I don't mind the Jack Doyle play. Minimum price tight end on DraftKings. And then on FanDuel, he's a little bit more than min price, but not much. The only thing is, I don't know how much work he's going to get. Dwayne Allen left pretty early in the game, and still, Jack Doyle only got 4 targets. He caught all 4 of them. He's been very efficient. He's got 23 targets, and he's caught 20 of them, right? But, if he doesn't get on the board, I mean, that's something we can say for every tight end pretty much that's not at the top end, right? If they don't get on the board, it's not going to pay off. But I do like Delaney Walker a little bit this week. It's a good matchup against the tight end. I mean, Indy's just got a bad defense overall. I do want to say, you were talking about paying down at running back, so then you could, potentially get like a DeMarco Murray. I definitely wouldn't want to pair like Rodgers with Murray, for example, this week, because not only are they individually going to be probably the 2 highest owned running backs, but then people are going to use that strategy as well. So it's not only that their individual ownership will be high, people will have them in the same lineup as a lot as well. So if you pick DeMarco Murray, don't do it when you're also picking Rodgers and vice versa, for example.
It's a good point. So we talked about defense. Another defense I really like this week is Tennessee, and I know it sounds kind of taboo to play a defense against Andrew Luck and the Indianapolis Colts, but they fit right in with my formula. Tennessee Titans have quietly been one of the better defenses at getting after the quarterback this season. Arakpo is having a monster season. They're top 5 in sacks, and no quarterback in the NFL gets sacked more than Andrew Luck. He's been sacked 23 times in 6 games. So you look at a team like the Colts, who I don't think are going to be able to come in and run the ball super effectively. They're going to have to throw. I could see 3 or 4 sacks on Andrew Luck. The offensive line is just, it's almost criminal, the offensive line they've put in front of Andrew Luck. And then I could see a situation where if Andrew Luck has a volume of throws, or if they get down, he could make a mistake, throw a pick or 2. So the Titans could be a sneaky good defensive play this week. Any final thoughts for you on this game, Hadley?
Yeah, definitely support the Titans defense. They're probably not going to be heavily owned, but look, it's been a trend Andrew Luck's whole career, both with the sacks and the interceptions. So that's something, like I brought up earlier, that's something you want to target for your defense. And how about Suck Up? There's your FanDuel min price kicker play that you could plug in there. I think he's a good play this week.
All right, we got the kicker reference out of the way on this show. The New Orleans Saints, Stokes, they leave the comfort of the Superdome, which I know breaks your heart, and they head to Kansas City to take on the Chiefs. Philip Gaines for the Chiefs is questionable. He was limited in practice. Definitely want to keep an eye on that because he is their second best cornerback next to Marcus Peters. Jamal Charles had some knee swelling on Friday, left practiced early. It's kind of a disappointing setback because he looked like he was at least going to start to get in line to get about half the work from Spencer Ware, but definitely want to keep an eye on that. Maybe you'll hear something on Saturday, but you'll see something when the inactives come out. And from the Saints standpoint, they're relatively healthy at this point in time, although Mark Ingram's pride is hurting because he's been struggling quite a bit. So, Hadley, what do you think about this matchup?
Yeah, I don't like the Saints away from the Superdome, particularly like the high price that you have to pay for Drew Brees. He still puts up yards a lot of times, but it's the touchdowns that go down. If you look at against the Giants and the Chargers, 3 combined touchdowns in those 2 games on the road. It's been a thing his whole career, right? The home road splits. So don't pay that high price tag for Drew Brees. And the Chiefs defense, they haven't been great, but they look much better when they're in Arrowhead. And Cooks is another guy with the he matches Drew Brees with the big home road splits. He doesn't show up on the road very often.
Stokes, I know you're not a big fan of the Saints when they go outside the comfort of the Superdome. What do you think about this matchup?
I have conflicting thoughts in regards to this game. I think that the Saints, they can keep it close, and I think that Breeze would be able to pass all over the Chiefs because of I don't think their defense is as good as it used to be or it was last year. So I think that I wouldn't pay up for the Saints big plays because they are away from the Superdome. But I do think the game will be close, and if that's the case, you're obviously not going to sit any of these guys in season long because you paid a nice price for Breeze and Cooks and Ingram, so you're not going to sit them at all. But in daily, I would avoid them just for the road reason, but I expect it to be a good game. And as far as the Chiefs, I would put Ware back out there. I don't think that Andy Reid is going to do much risking as far as Jamal Charles is concerned. So I would think that Spencer Ware at that price is really good, especially with the fact that the Saints defense is just terrible.
I co-sign the Ware thing. Even if Charles plays, I think Ware's the guy this week. If you're a guy that if you're a player that owns Ware or Charles and Charles, I think, and you're always deciding who should I play, you play Ware this week. Even if Charles plays, I expect Ware to be the guy to get the majority of the workload against a very gravy matchup. The thing about the Saints that's interesting is going into the season, Brandon Cooks was thought of to be the guy, and he's been that way. It's been a couple of boom matchups and a couple of quiet matchups. And then Snead was a guy that could be in that wide receiver 3 conversation. But then Mike Thomas started elevating his game and really is almost like a low-end wide receiver 3 in season long, finds the end zone pretty consistently. And Snead had the foot injury, and he missed a game or 2, and then he really hasn't been as involved in Thomas as the weeks have gone on. So when I look at this matchup, I love trying to put the puzzle together of what I think's going to happen with these receivers and taking salary out of it. To me, I said last week felt like a Brandon Cooks game. I'm going to double down on that and say this week feels like a Brandon Cooks game because of a couple factors. One, Marcus Peters, who is the star young cornerback for the Chiefs, is a left cornerback. He doesn't follow. So when you look at the Saints offense, the receiver that lines up on that side is Mike Thomas. So it's not that I wouldn't play Mike Thomas in season long, but I'm not going to go out and try to get him in daily. So then you look at Willie Snead. The Chiefs have been very great against slot receivers, so I'm not going to be super excited about Willie Snead. Then you look at the Philip Gaines injury, and that's the guy that would be playing over the top of Brandon Cooks, and this just feels to me like a Brandon Cooks game. So I know we're a little nervous about the Saints leaving the Superdome, but their defense is always going to be bad, so they're always going to have to score, and I think the receivers, I would rank them this week. I would go Cooks, Snead, Thomas. As far as my Saints pecking order of receivers, but then I would flip it as far as who has the best chance to score. I would say Cooks, Thomas, Snead, because Thomas is just getting so many red zone looks. I'm not touching Mark Ingram this week in daily. If you have him in season long, you probably have to play him, but he's even being faded out on the passing downs as Cadet's taken over that role. That's about all I got on this game. Oh, okay, Alex Smith, streaming quarterback option. You see him in a home game against the Saints. I don't love it. I think Alex Smith always has limited upside, but Hadley, a lot of people are going to look at that and think it's a good play. What do you think about Alex Smith?
Yeah, so I think it plays kind of similarly to Oakland last week, right? A lot of people got disappointed by the Chiefs passing game, and I think it's the same thing. They're going to run the ball on the Saints. The Saints can't stop the run. I support Spencer Ware. I'm going to play him probably a lot. The only thing I'll say is Vegas is starting to think that maybe the Saints will keep it close. The betting's like 50-50. It's actually 51-49 in favor of the Chiefs in the betting, but the Saints went from a 7-point dog to a 6-point dog, so a little movement there. And the over-under has gone up 1.5 points, so it started at 49.5, and now it's 51. So, I mean, apparently there's going to be points to be scored. I'm not too sure yet what's going to happen in the game. I'd like to see the player props Sunday morning before I make final decisions on that.
Hadley brings up a good point, and it's a good tool you can use. He's looking at the game script, which is the point spread, the over-under, and that, obviously Vegas doesn't always get it right, but it at least tells you what the experts who are predicting this game think. So if you look at the over-under, you can see, X amount of points are going to be scored, and if this team's favored by 4, you just go to the middle. What's the difference of 4 points? This team's going to score this amount. This team's going to score that amount. It just kind of helps give you an idea when you're making that decision. So if you're looking at 2 players and you can't decide who to play, and one player is playing in a game that projects to have 52 total points scored, and the other one's in like a game that's going to have 40, maybe that's a tiebreaker. So, guys, I'm about done with this game. Stokes, do you have any final thoughts before we move on?
No, sir.
I know Travis Kelce is going to be in your lineup, but that doesn't even feel like something that needs to be said because juicy matchup for your boy.
My dog.
All right, guys. Well, we go from talking about a game with a bunch of intriguing matchups and good fantasy players to talking about the direct opposite as the Baltimore Ravens travel to New York this week to take on the New York Jets. And the big story out of Jets camp is Geno Smith is going to be getting the start. And for the Ravens, Joe Flacco hasn't practiced all week. He's listed as questionable, but it's hard for me to believe he's going to play this week after not taking a single rep in practice. Steve Smith is also doubtful, and the Ravens' best offensive lineman, Marshall Yanda, is doubtful. So who do I want to throw this one to and make it their lucky day? Stokes, tell me about the Ravens and the Jets' juicy matchup.
Oh, my gosh. I mean, I would just like to skip this game altogether. You can't put anyone out there with any sort of confidence at all. And you can't trust West. You can't trust any of the Jets wide receivers because Geno is throwing on the ball. Can't trust any of the Ravens. I mean, can I just take the under on the game and move on? Because this is awful.
I totally agree with you. I think where we'll disagree with you is on West. I think there's 2 guys in this game that if you own them in season long, you have to throw out there. Is Brandon Marshall and Terrence West. I think they've been productive enough that you can't just put them on the bench. Obviously, it's less than ideal circumstances in a game that projects to have very little scoring. And maybe you have better options. I'm thinking more so about Terrence West, but those are the only 2 guys I'm throwing out there. Even Dennis Pitta, who's been involved well. If Ryan Mallett starts this game, I'd look at a guy like a Jack Doyle if he's out there. And this, I'm talking to season-long guys. If you're in daily, you can just skip past this game because I'm not endorsing anybody for daily in this game. Jack Doyle, Charles Clay, Vernon Davis, who we mentioned earlier. I'd like them all better than Dennis Pitta if Ryan Mallett starts this game. Hadley, thoughts on this game?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure it's going to be Flacco. He returned to full practice today, so it's probably going to be Flacco, and he's a durable, kind of tough guy there at QB. I think you guys are sleeping on Brandon Marshall here. I think Geno Smith got in for, was it 1 start last year? Anyway, I'd heard a number that he targeted Brandon Marshall like 18 times in one game. The Baltimore pass defense is #bad, so I'm fine playing Brandon Marshall. We talked about our friend Sharice right there giving it up to Crabtree a while back. I think Jimmy Smith is still injured, and even if he's not, he hasn't been playing particularly well. So I can endorse Marshall. And Vegas has the Jets favored by 2 points. So I mean, and all the action is actually on the Ravens. So they're pretty confident in the Jets still being able to win with Geno starting there. So they're going to put up points somehow. I think Marshall's your good bet, and you're going to get them at a decreased ownership compared to the other high-end wide receivers. So
it's probably worth mentioning, if anybody cares, that Austin Seferian-Jenkins is out this game. I don't think he would be on anybody's fantasy radar, but it's worth mentioning. Let's move on to a game that should have plenty of fantasy interest, as the San Diego Chargers travel to Atlanta to take on the Atlanta Falcons. This is a 4:05 start. Travis Benjamin is questionable. He was limited in practice on Friday, but it looks like he's trending toward playing. My thoughts on this game is start everybody. Hadley, what do you think about this game?
Pretty much the same. Yeah. I mean, I think, going back to the old bias, I can't really endorse Antonio Gates, but they definitely still like him there. And I think he's going for a touchdown record. I think he's about 5 or so touchdowns away from like all-time touchdown leaders in tight end. I might have that wrong, but I think he's close to that. Hunter Henry has seen a decrease in snaps, obviously, since Gates has been back, but he's still getting targeted in the pass game. Obviously, last week we saw him have a pretty nice performance with 6 for 83 and a touchdown. So you can play Hunter Henry. If you like old guys, you can play Antonio Gates. Atlanta is very bad against the tight end. This is, the highest total on the board there for over-under by a decent margin. It's at 54 now, and the Saints Chiefs is at 51, and everyone else is under 50. So it's way up there, and it's gonna be fireworks.
Ryan and Rivers are both great starts this week. Julio, obviously, season long you're playing him. I think he's actually, if you're going to pay up for him any week in daily, maybe this is the week to do it, especially if you're nervous about Antonio Brown and you're somebody who likes to pay up for receivers. I would certainly target Julio and A.J. Green over Antonio Brown with Landry Jones coming in. To me, I think there's guys that are obvious in this game, and then there's guys that we need to talk about. Like, I think Ryan and Rivers and Julio are obvious. I think Devontae Freeman's obvious. I think he's going to have a monster game. Stokes, what do you think about Tevin Coleman in this game? He's a guy that his production's been kind of hard to predict because he's been that pass catcher in Atlanta, but he's also been getting a good fair share of carries. The numbers did dip the last couple of weeks as they played some better defenses, and then there was the whole sickle cell thing in Denver, but he still found a way to produce. They didn't do well in Seattle last week, but to me, if I have Tevin Coleman on my roster, I'm playing him this week in season long.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that you could look at the last 2 weeks. Although he did play well against Denver, at Seattle, I mean it's something that you just have to expect, that you just don't know what's going to happen with because of Seattle defense, and again, going against essentially the polar opposite, the Chargers defense. I would absolutely throw every starting player that I have on each of those teams. I would play them all in season long, and I can see them all doing well. Freeman, Coleman. The point total for the game is high for a reason, because both of these defenses are not going to stop either of them, and it's just going to be a lot of fun to watch. If you're an offensive football fan, you're gonna love watching this game, I think.
Hadley, we talked about the tight ends. How do you rank the receivers right now in San Diego?
Especially with the injury to Travis Benjamin, then it's definitely Tyrell Williams is going to be number 1, right? One thing I want to throw out there, just a little bit of a hot take, like Julio Jones has only seen double-digit targets once this year, and obviously it was the eruption game against Carolina. Like, for whatever reason, they don't really force-feed him the ball. Like, you see guys like Mike Evans, who on the other end of the spectrum, he's only seen less than double-digit targets the one time, and that was week 1 in Atlanta. In Atlanta, he had 7 targets. Every other week, he's at least 11, whereas Julio Jones had the 15 targets in that Carolina game. But then his high, other than that, is 9 from last week, and you have like a 6 mixed in there, a 5 mixed in there. He's going to be the highest owned receiver, percentage wise. He's, only Antonio Brown costs you more. If you're playing a lot of lineups, like, of course you want to throw Julio Jones into one of them, but if you're only going to take 1-2 shots in a tournament, like, you got to take some chances. Maybe consider not going Julio Jones in that situation.
Yeah, I get that. Julio is never gonna get the same targets as like Antonio Brown, and that's the one thing that makes people nervous about Julio is he and Beckham both have been not as target heavy as Antonio Brown. As far as the rest of this game, there's just nobody that I would even rule out. I think I'd even be tempted to throw Inman in there if I had to, just for like a cheap receiver if I maxed out my daily roster and just needed somebody to get points. I think there's going to be that many points scored in this one. Okay, so let's talk. We go from a game that's going to have a lot of points scored to a game that may not, as the Minnesota Vikings take their beastly defense on the road to Philadelphia to take on the Philadelphia Eagles. Stokes, don't start any Eagles?
No, I would completely fade all the Eagles because that Vikings defense is just ridiculous. So I couldn't legitimize starting. I mean, maybe Ryan Matthews because he's probably gonna get the most touches of any of them. But I mean, that's if you had a gun to my head and trying to force me to play somebody. But that's about it.
What's your take on this game, Hadley?
Yeah, I wouldn't play anyone except in season long. We can get through this game pretty quickly, and actually I want to get to a stat that I forgot to bring up for the last game. So as far as the running backs, these two teams have given up the most passing yards to running backs in the league. So Atlanta's given up 423 passing yards to running backs, or receiving yards, I guess, to running backs, and San Diego's given up 416. So the two-headed monster in Atlanta is very involved in the pass game, and of course Melvin Gordon too. So you like that for those guys. But so getting back to the game that we're on, like I said, season long, Jordan Matthews probably don't have a better option than him, but maybe Stephon Diggs as well. Other than that, nothing. Vikings defense.
And Stephon Diggs has been limited with a groin injury. Even if you're a Zach Ertz owner, Minnesota hasn't given up a touchdown to a tight end all season long, so I would look for one of those other options we talked about earlier if you can. Charles Clay, Vernon Davis, Jack Doyle, we talked about those guys earlier. So if Diggs is out, that brings Adam Thielen back into maybe consideration, but I just don't think there's going to be enough points in this game to really justify it. Jerick McKinnon's interesting just because the volume's going to be there, but then there's always Matt Asiata to sit there and be the TJ Duckett to his work done. So there's an old school fantasy reference for you. So I think you start the Minnesota defense in this game. What do you think about that one, Stokes? Bold strategy?
That is hot take right there.
All right, let's talk about the Oakland Raiders traveling to Jacksonville to take on the Jacksonville Jaguars. Latavius Murray was limited. He's questionable. It sounds like even if he plays, he might be on some sort of a snap count, but to me, that entire Oakland Raiders backfield is trending toward the nasty running back by committee, and it's just looking like a situation I'm going to try to avoid altogether. For Jacksonville, Julius Thomas is questionable. He's limited in practice on Fridays, but it looks like he's probably going to play. And I do have an interesting stat. One guy that I really like as far as his fantasy advice is Mike Clay on ESPN. He has Blake Bortles as his third highest quarterback this week as far as quarterbacks ranked after the Thursday night game. I can't get anywhere near that high on Blake Bortles, but when Clay throws something out there like that, I always want to at least look at it and try to figure it out. But I can't get there with Bortles. Hadley, what are your thoughts on this game?
Well, it's just that Oakland's pass defense has been so bad. I mean, they brought in Bruce Irvin to rush the passer with Khalil Mack, and they've both been disappointing this year. Plus, bring in Sean Smith at cornerback, and they're getting just, roasted by wide receivers. Vegas lines are really, really weird for this game. So 78% of the bets are on the Raiders. The line hasn't moved at all. The Jags are still favored by 1.5. The over-under started at 50, and it's down to 47.5, even though the public's on the over. So it looks like they don't think it's going to be that much of a shootout, despite a couple of bad defenses. I still agree that Bortles is going to be a pretty good play this week. I mean, 21 points is not a huge number, but if they're all from passing touchdowns, that's a good day. And I like Allen Robinson as well.
I guess Bortles just makes me nervous because I thought last week was his juicy matchup against the Bears, and really, save for a touchdown at the very end of the game that, for all intents and purposes, should not have even been a touchdown. He just threw it to, I forget what the receiver was, some guy that I didn't even realize was still in the league. Aurelius Ben. That's the guy that was like drafted in the mid 2000s, and it was like, he's still in the league, and he just caught like a simple curl route and fell to the ground, and nobody was around to touch him, so he just like got up and ran to the end zone like, hey, I guess I'll do that. I'm sure Jenny really liked that one, Stokes.
Yeah, she wasn't very happy.
Stokes' wife is a Bears fan, so that one was probably just depressing for her. But yeah, this game definitely has at least the makings of what could be a shootout, but I don't trust really either of these quarterbacks. I mentioned last week I was nervous about Derek Carr. I see some bad signs from guys who watch the game tape and see his tendencies, and looked like he'd been kind of lucky on some of his completions, but then I backtracked away from it, and I was like, well, I think he's still going to find a way to put up a couple touchdowns against the Chiefs. Kind of wish I would have stuck by that. My original take.
It was a bad weather game, though.
It was a bad weather game. I think Derek Carr is going to be a guy that maybe becomes similar to Ryan Tannehill, where his fantasy production makes him look better than what his real production is, because I think he's always going to find a way to put up numbers. I think he's better than Tannehill, but I don't know how much better than Tannehill he is. I think he gets numbers this week. I like Crabtree. You're going to start Cooper, obviously. I kind of like Clive Walford if you need a tight end and you're really in a pinch. That's about it. I wouldn't touch a running back on the Raiders, and I'm not touching either one of the Jacksonville Jaguars running backs at this point. Hadley, final thoughts on this game?
Yeah, I just want to emphasize again, logically, I would think Oakland's a pretty good play, but Vegas is pretty down on them in this game, so I'm not going to go crazy with them. Obviously, in season long, you're playing all those guys, but I don't know if I'll have any of the Raiders in daily, but I do like the Bortles to Robinson connection, maybe one lineup or something with them.
The Raiders have kind of bucked the trend, too, because the old theory is that the West Coast team traveling east to play a noon kickoff game usually are at a disadvantage, but the Raiders have already won in Baltimore, and they've won in Tennessee this year, so this will be their third chance to do that, and we'll see if they can get it done. I think if I had to pick this game, I would say I think Oakland's going to win, but I don't know. This one to me feels like it might be the letdown of the week where we're expecting a lot of points to be scored and maybe it doesn't pan out that way. Not sure why. I just have a bad feeling about it. Let's see. Minnesota and Philadelphia we've talked about, so let's move on to Hadley's Bucks going to San Francisco to take on the 49ers. Colin Kaepernick got his first start last week. There were some mixed results. They fell behind in a big way, and then he ended up having to throw, and it wasn't a good thing. Doug Martin remains out. Carlos Hyde is out, so we have two backup running backs starting this game. Vincent Jackson is out for the Bucks, which means Humphreys elevates to that number 2 wide receiver. For Tampa Bay, it looks like Jacquez Rodgers is going to start against the NFL's worst run defense. He had a very productive night last Monday night against Carolina. And then for San Francisco, it looks to be a mix of Mike Davis and Sean Drone, but my gut is it's going to be a 70-30 kind of split with Mike Davis getting the majority of the work. And then Torrey Smith was limited Friday, which is kind of disappointing because I thought, we even said this on the show last week, that with the switch to Kaepernick, that Torrey Smith could become the more go-to-ish guy in the offense versus Jeremy Curley, and that did pan out last week as he had the long touchdown and had another touchdown that was just, he would have scored if Kaepernick could put it on the money, but that's a Kaepernick issue. So, Stokes, I keep giving you the ugly games. What are your thoughts on this game?
Well, the one thing we do know about Quiz is he is going to get the volume. He had for 35 touches in the game against Carolina, so I mean, this is about as juicy of a matchup as you could expect. He's going to get the volume, and the Niners are just terrible against the run, so you should just chalk that up to it's going to be a big game. But I mean, as far as DFS is concerned, he's going to be highly owned, obviously, along with Gillislee if Shady is ruled inactive. So if it's a cash game, I assume you should just throw him in there and just enjoy the benefits. I kind of like Colin Kaepernick in this matchup for some reason. I know it may be weird. I think this would be more regarding season long, but I think that the way he's getting the rushing stats and he's able. We saw against the Bills when he got out of the pocket and was running, he was difficult to bring down. So that's an easy 6-7 points, and if he gets a touchdown, that's even more obviously. And I think the more he plays quarterback in this offense, the more comfortable he can get. So I think that at that price, he could be a nice little sleeper.
Yeah, he certainly has more upside than Blaine Gabbert, that's for sure. He's a better athlete, and there were some moments in the game last week where you saw some flashes where Jerry Hughes had him dead to rights on a safety in the end zone, and he just broke the tackle and ran for 15, 20 yards. So he can pull that out. He's still a big, strong, fast quarterback with a rocket arm. Maybe he can put it together as he becomes more comfortable in this offense. Hadley, let's talk about the Jacquizz Rodgers thing, because ownership is going to be a problem. But we actually had a conversation off air about this where, yes, he's going to be highly owned, but if you keep him out of your lineup strictly because of how highly he's owned, and say you go to somebody like a Devontae Freeman or something and be like, okay, well, I'm going to go to Freeman instead of Rodgers, and I'm going to spend, $2,000 more, and you get the same production out of him, all you've done is cost yourself $2,000 in your lineup for the same production. So I think, yes, you want to pay attention to ownership, but if a guy is that cheap and he has such a juicy matchup, I think my own personal philosophy is I think you throw him in there at the discounted rate, you take the same production everybody else is going to get at that discounted rate, and then you trust yourself to put a lineup together outside of that position better than everybody else. Do you agree with that philosophy, or does his high ownership scare you away?
Yeah, so I mean, it's something. Again, I think your approach has to be different depending on how many lineups you're playing. If you're only taking 1 to 2 shots, what's the point of just matching the field with Jacquizz Rodgers? Like, try something else. There's good plays out there. I brought up, Matt Jones, who's got a similar price point. It also depends on the news of Shady McCoy. Are we going to have Gillislee as an option as well? But for example, he is 55% on Fantasy Aces. Now, again, I want to stress, this is a smaller site. It's more diehard people. They're more, plugged into what are the plays and stuff versus a few more casual players that you'll see on DraftKings and FanDuel. So I don't think anyone's going to be over 40. I think 40% is a good number for him. So I think what you want to do is, if you only have 1 or 2 lineups, I would try and do something else. If you have more than that, I would say put him in around 50% of your lineups. So you have some lineups that you're not going to have him. You want a different direction. And, if he does happen to go off, he's not that talented a player, right? He's bounced around the league. He's been in the league for a while. He's not great, right? He's like the third half, running back that's on Tampa Bay. It's just because they have 2 injuries that he's playing. So he's not supremely talented, but the matchup is as juicy as it gets, and he just doesn't cost a lot. So you'll want to have him in some lineups if you're playing enough lineups.
Stokes, what do you think of Jameis Winston in this game?
I don't think much of him, to be quite honest. I think that if the running game is going like we expect it to go, they're just going to keep on riding it because the Niners aren't a good run defense. And I think that Jameis as a whole, he's just a guy that is inconsistent with his accuracy. And that's something that I don't know whether I could trust as far as a daily position, considering his price is $6,000, and we've talked about other quarterbacks who are around that price or cheaper. So I wouldn't throw him out there in season long or DFS.
Yeah, some of the names around that range are Blake Bortles, Derek Carr, Andy Dalton, Marcus Mariota. Kirk Cousins is even cheaper than Winston. Tyrod Taylor is $4,000 cheaper than Taylor, and then even Carson Palmer, even though he's going up against Seattle. So I would agree with Stokes on that. Even though it looks like a juicy matchup, I would look elsewhere besides famous Jameis. Hadley, any final thoughts on this matchup?
Yeah, I would play Mike Evans. You know, the volume is ridiculously high for that guy. And the thing is, even though we know that Tampa is going to try and run the ball in this juicy matchup, we've seen this with Chip Kelly. He runs so many plays. It just gives the other team, chances to run more plays themselves. And, the defense gets, especially when you don't have a talented offense, it's very quick 3-and-outs that we see sometimes, and you have a tired defense on the other side. Like, Tampa is probably going to win this game handedly. I can see Colin Kaepernick on FanDuel. I actually can. He's so cheap on there compared to the rest of the field. Like, I can see it. I mean, his one start this year, 18.1 points. That's not terrible. He didn't even have a good game, and that's what he got you. He just brings so much rushing upside. So if he gets you like 2 touchdowns along with the rushing upside, which counts for more than a touchdown with how many yards that he piles up, I can see it on FanDuel.
All right, guys, let's talk about the New England Patriots traveling to Pittsburgh to take on the Pittsburgh Steelers. The big story from this game is no Big Ben, as he is going to miss anywhere from 1 to 4 weeks. We'll see what happens there with his leg injury. Steelers also are going to be without D'Angelo Williams, who was ruled out. So maybe you see Carlos Williams promoted from the practice squad to be the backup to Le'Veon Bell. Marcus Wheaton remains out for the Patriots. Everybody on the entire roster is questionable, with the exception of Gronk, who was actually off the injury report this week, which is a great sign for Gronk owners and Brady owners. Stokes, I'm going to give you a good game to talk about first. What are your thoughts on this game?
Going into last week, you would have thought this was a great matchup. But with Ben out, it definitely takes some fire out of it. I think that a lot of people are going to fade Antonio because of the fact that last year, when there was no Ben, AB was just awful. Well, not he was awful, but Landry Jones and Vic and those guys just couldn't get him the ball the way he normally gets it. So I think I can see a lot of people not using AB, but is that an opportunity for you to use Antonio Brown in case Landry Jones learned from last year's mistakes?
No.
Well, there's that. So of course you're gonna start Brady, you're gonna start Gronk, you're gonna start James White. That's my dog. I was on his bandwagon a little bit. That's another cheap running back option. I think that both White and Blunt can eat in this game. So I think that the Patriots offense Brady is on a mission. He's trying to torch everybody he sees, and it's just awful to watch.
You saw what Ajay did to the Steelers last week. You could see Blunt having similar results. Blunt's very TD dependent, but he's going to have plenty of opportunities to score touchdowns in these games. I think the reason why you heard Hadley say emphatically no on Brown is, yes, it's a very smart contrarian play from a strategic standpoint, but it's a very expensive contrarian play to get Antonio Brown in there at 9,000 or whatever he's at. I don't know. I get the strategy, Stokes, but I think for the price, I'd rather go with something a little more safe. But I definitely understand the strategy. I'm not touching Landry Jones, even with the weapons around him, although I haven't looked at his price. Maybe I'll change my mind on that. Maybe throw him in like a cheap tournament lineup or something. For the Patriots, you're starting to see Gronk come back and look like his old self. I still think Bennett. My thought on the Patriots, I said it last week, I'll say it again this week. I think there are 3 guys on the Patriots you can trust every week, and one of them has not been doing anything so far. I think you can trust Brady, you can trust Gronk, and you can trust Edelman. Edelman hasn't done squat so far now. This is a matchup where Pittsburgh struggles to get slot receivers. Edelman should eat. If Edelman doesn't do well this week, I'm going to change my stance and say there's 2 guys on the Patriots you can trust every week, Brady and Gronk. Everybody else is going to rotate around. Now, there's some speculation that maybe Martellus Bennett's presence in the offense is taking away from Edelman because he's actually getting the secondary underneath routes besides Gronk. But outside of that, I think Hogan, Amendola, James White, Blunt, they're all going to have their days, but they're going to be pretty hard to predict. Hadley, what are your thoughts on this game?
Yeah, Edelman's never really been a touchdown guy, so he's kind of due for a touchdown, but at the same time, so last year in 9 games, he had 7 touchdowns, but before that, quick math, he had 14 touchdowns in his whole career. So he's a PPR guy, but he doesn't typically get touchdowns. I think wasn't it only like a 3-point game or something at half with Cleveland last week? I know it was a close game at halftime. I think after halftime they came out a lot more with the dual tight end set, and I believe that Bennett had all 5 of his catches after the break last week. So I think Bennett is still okay. Obviously, the guys you want are Brady and Gronk, and they started blowing out the Browns, and they don't care. They still throw the ball. So, I wouldn't worry too much about Brady. He's kind of on the revenge tour, right? So, James White, another play, like when we're talking about potential plays instead of Jacquizz, right? James White, you're not going to get any ownership on the guy. He's going to get at least a few catches in this offense with Brady. Last week he cashed in with 2 touchdowns, so you could play him. Blunt, very touchdown dependent, but if it gets out of hand, they're going to give it to him. He might finish with 20 yards, but he could have 3 touchdowns. It's not out of the realm of possibility.
My one concern about the Patriots offense this game is actually the fact that Big Ben isn't playing, because I could see the Steelers going to a strategy where they really lean on the running game and Le'Veon Bell and try to shorten the game and play time possession and really limit the Patriot possessions in this game. Now, obviously, the Patriots are still talented enough that even if they get 1 or 2 less possessions as the game plays out, they could still get plenty of production. But it's something to look at where if the Steelers were fully healthy with Roethlisberger, you would just be super excited about this as both an NFL fan and a fantasy owner. But with Landry Jones in there, I think the Steelers realize they're going to be limited, and they're going to do everything they can to limit the Patriots offensively and try to make it a defensive battle. Patriots didn't look great last week in Cleveland. They finally, or 2 weeks ago in Cleveland. But then last week in Cincinnati, they actually started off slow too, and they were down in the second half and then finally turned it on. So they've had some slow starts. It's going to be interesting to see what happens going forward. I don't think in daily I'm not touching any Steelers, and in season long I think you still got to throw Bell obviously and Brown out there. But other than that, I'm not going to play Coates in season long unless I just have 0 other options. And I'm not touching Jesse James anymore. He was our guy for a while, but I'm not touching him until Ben gets back. So, Stokes, any final thoughts on this game?
No, not at all. Yep, that's it. No.
Hadley?
Yeah, so I mixed up those games too with against Cincinnati and Cleveland. I meant Cincy for what I was talking about there. I think Cincy was ahead actually at half, right? And Cleveland they broke away when that safety play happened. That's what really broke the game open. Mm-hmm. Landry Jones is just such another #bad player. Like, I believe I wasn't following the preseason, but I heard that he had a 4 interception game in the preseason. Like, I don't even think I would have a 4 interception game in the preseason. Mm-hmm. So, like, if you're the Patriots, there's no reason to respect the pass at all. Why would you not just load the box against the run? So I just, try and let Landry Jones beat you. He's not going to do it.
Yeah, and that goes back to the conversation of this is a guy that's shaky in the pocket. He's kind of a statue. He's going to take some sacks. So obviously we don't need to tell you that the Patriots are a good defensive play this week, but you have them in season long, you're playing them, and they might be worth paying up for in daily. Let's talk about the Sunday night matchup as the Seattle Seahawks travel to Arizona to take on the Arizona Cardinals. We got some news today that John Brown is going to be out. Sounds like he has a sickle cell trait. That's depressing. You hate to hear that about a player. Obviously, it's something that other players have to deal with, but you hate to see that happen to a guy that's kind of entering the prime of his career, and it looks like he has a really promising career. Just like another obstacle that is kind of sad to see. Carson Palmer is questionable, limited with a hamstring injury, but he's going to play most likely. Doesn't mean he's going to play effectively against Seattle. And Seattle looks relatively healthy, except for the fact that Thomas Rawls remains out. Hadley, what are your thoughts on this matchup?
So here's a place where I actually think it makes sense to pay up to be contrarian, which would be David Johnson. We already saw that Jets run defense is still very good despite what David Johnson did to him. It just shows you how much of a freak this guy is. So you can consider going there, against Seattle, particularly with Arizona being the home team here. That's going to get you a low ownership, even though the guy just blew up last week. And that's a play where instead of going, Jaquiz with the highly owned DeMarco, maybe you go Jaquiz, which is highly owned, but then your contrarian play is putting David Johnson in there. So I like that. Can consider Christian Michael as well. And then I think that would just about do it for this game for me.
Jimmy Graham?
Arizona's been very good against the tight end.
Okay. Stokes, what do you think about this matchup?
I do like Jimmy Graham. I think that the Seahawks are starting to find a way to get Jimmy Graham involved in the passing game, and he's paying dividends in that regard. I think that the more comfortable he gets with them, the better he's going to be. I do also, as Had said, I like David Johnson. I think that at this point, it's just difficult to justify to yourself sitting him because, I mean, he's a great running back and he's a great pass catching back. The way he runs the ball, he just seems like he's so patient and he's so effective at being able to find the right hole and making the right moves. So I don't think that even the Seattle defense is going to be able to stop him. I wouldn't play either of the quarterbacks, but just David Johnson and Jimmy Graham are really the only players. I know they like to put Fitz in the slot at times, but I can't really bring my mind around to starting any of the wide receiving options on either team.
I like Fitz in this matchup as I think you have to temper your expectations. I mean, he's not going to go out there and get 3 touchdowns, I wouldn't think. But I do think that with Cam Chancellor being out, you saw some breakdowns on Seattle's defense last week. I mean, this was Julio Jones, so let's take it with a grain of salt. But you saw some breakdowns where plays that Chancellor made, there was some miscommunication with Sherman and the safety, and you saw a sideline spat. So this is a situation where if John Brown was playing, maybe I would even think about throwing him in there thinking, well, maybe you get a mix-up and John Brown gets behind the defense. But with Fitzgerald in the slot, he's not going to have to deal with Richard Sherman. You expect Sherman's probably going to line up a lot on Michael Floyd, which Michael Floyd, I don't care if John Brown's playing or not. I don't care if Michael Floyd scored last week or not. He's not touching any of my lineups, and he just needs to produce about 3 or 4 weeks in a row before I consider him for anything. I think Fitzgerald has been Carson Palmer's pseudo tight end. It's the slot receiver. It's the easy read. Him and David Johnson, for the most part, have been like the checkdowns in the offense. I could see Fitzgerald having one of those nice, comfortable, 5-6 catch games where he gets 60, 70 yards, and there's some value for that in DraftKings and especially in PPR leagues. I don't know if I'm going to put Fitzgerald in my lineup in daily, which I know is what we talk about predominantly on this show, but if you have Fitzgerald in season long, I think you play him and you feel like, okay, he's not going to carry my team this week, but he's probably going to put up about 13 or 14 points in a PPR league, and that's going to be enough. Maybe he sneaks into the end zone, you never know. And I agree with you guys. I will agree with Hadley. I think Christine Michael is, at this point, I think you just have to keep him in your lineup. And maybe, again, in this matchup, you're not as excited. But LaShawn McCoy tore this run defense up. So Michael's playing very well. Now, the Bills' offensive line is worlds better than Seattle's offensive line. But Michael's been very productive. So something to think about. Guys, the last matchup on the slate, the Brock Osweiler Bowl, as he travels back to Denver take on the Denver Broncos. The Broncos are now riding a rare 2-game losing streak, so they're angry, and they're going up against the quarterback who snubbed them this offseason. Will Fuller's been practicing. Looks like he's going to play, and that's pretty much it for injuries in this game. Stokes, thoughts on Houston at Denver?
I think it's very interesting that Nuke is coming off a 15-target game, and his price got completely dwarfed just because they're playing against Denver. I like Lamar Miller in this game. I think that he's going to get the volume, and I think he's effective enough to continue to attack Denver how they've been attacked over the course of the season. And I think that the Denver defense is going to try their best to make Brock Osweiler look as awful as possible in this game. But at the same time, I don't think that Simeon's going to be that good. So the only option in this game, if anything, would be Lamar Miller for me. I wouldn't play C.J. Anderson. I definitely wouldn't play either of the Denver wide receivers.
You know, the thing about C.J. Anderson is he's almost getting to the point where he could be a contrarian play because there seems to be a school of thought in the fantasy world that Devontae Booker is like a name to watch, and he's coming on, and he's a guy that's going to take over C.J. Anderson's role. But the snap count is just not bearing that out. C.J. Anderson is still getting the lion's share of the snaps, and he's getting the bell cow, enough to be called a bell cow now, whether or not he's producing at a bell cow level. But he's still really, really significantly outproducing Devontae Booker as far as snap counts go. But I tend to agree with you. I wouldn't be super excited about playing either of the Denver wide receivers. I think one of them will probably have a good game, but guessing which one that would be, it seems almost like throwing a dart at this point. For Houston, I'm not touching anybody. Nobody in that offense am I touching. C.J. Fedorowicz, maybe if you want to just throw flip a coin or whatever and just like throw up a prayer for somebody, I could just see Osweiler being under so much duress that maybe he checks it down to the tight end 3 or 4 times. He's not going to have enough time to get the ball to Will Fuller. I think Osweiler's going to have a miserable game, and I would consider paying up for Denver's defense and daily. That's how much I like them in this matchup. Hadley, thoughts on this game?
Yeah, I like the defenses. I think you can go with Lamar Miller because of his workload. And definitely, I mean, you're obviously not benching him in season long, I would think. But if you're playing one of those like primetime slates, they call them, where it's just like the Sunday, Monday, or like literally like the 2 games, Sunday, Monday, or Monday, Thursday, then obviously, you got a limited pool and you might want to throw Lamar Miller in there. But if you're playing with Thursday that goes all the way around, like from Thursday to the next Monday, I don't see a case to play Lamar Miller there. But we have seen the Denver defense get touched up a little bit by running backs. Particularly, we saw both Atlanta running backs do pretty well, especially through the air. And he does get that workload through the air as well.
All right, guys. Well, that is a look at Week 7. Any final thoughts on any of these matchups before we call it a show? We're at the 90-minute mark, which is a little longer than we like to go, but there were some good tidbits this show. Stokes, any final thoughts?
Go Bills.
Go Bills.
That's my tidbit.
Trying to get that 5th win in a row.
That's right. Yeah, how you like that, Greg? Sorry.
It's Greg Roman to those of you who may not be as Bills savvy. And Shadow shared Swag's video. What the hell? Hadley, any final thoughts on this week?
Yeah, I just want to reinforce, like, running back is probably the position where you want to not concern yourself as much with how people are owned for tournaments, just because the workload is so guaranteed. So, back to like the Jacquizz Rodgers plays and stuff like that. If you have enough lineups, you definitely want to get them in at least a couple.
My final thought is if LeSean McCoy doesn't play, I like Mike Gillislee better than Jacquizz Rodgers this week. Hot take alert. But
I think that's fair. He's a better player. Jacquizz Rodgers isn't a good player.
Mm-hmm. But both of them have value, especially in the matchups they're in. So, guys, this was a fun show. That's a look at Week 7. We'll be back next week to preview Week 8 and talk about what happened in Week 7. And we'll see you next time on our Fantasy Football Preview.